Welcome to a dramatic presentation of The Other Wise Man by Henry van Dyck. The adaptation was put together by David Bryant, and the cast is drawn from members of First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville. But first, let me tell you about the author of the story, Henry van Dyck. He himself was like three wise men all rolled up into one. In the first aspect of his life, he was a Presbyterian minister. He had been born just before the Civil War, and he graduated from Princeton not long after it. He went on and began what was a conventional but effective pastoral career that included being an advisor and a spiritual confidant to Helen Keller, and one other person that was a bit surprising, Mark Twain. He actually was the preacher at Mark Twain's funeral in 1910, and that was definitely an honor. He must have really been something to be able to hold his own with Samuel Clemens. He would shortly thereafter be tapped for his second wise man role. The president of Princeton went on to become the president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. And he called on Reverend van Dyck to become the ambassador to the Netherlands and Luxembourg. This was in 1913, just before the outbreak of World War I. And over the course of his time in Europe, Henry van Dyck was largely working with refugees from all across the continent who were trying to find a place of safety or reach a place of safety across the ocean. It was in a war zone that he spent that time. And it is interesting that in 1896, before this had ever happened, as part of his literary career, I forgot to mention that one, he was teaching English at Princeton. He was publishing poems. He was publishing stories. And in the course of it in 1896, he published the story that we're about to hear, The Other Wise Man. And part of what happens in that story is that someone has to face the question how to conduct himself in the midst of war and how to help people that are in danger. These were questions that Van Dyck never knew he would face in his own life. He thought things were relatively easy. In fact, one of the most joyful poems that he ever wrote is about joy. It's one we still sing. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before the opening to the sun above. And the same man who wrote that would be there dealing with the devastation of World War I and doing it very well. Not all of his poetry survived. I mean, it's around, it's to be found, but some of it was not very good. Some of it, however, was. And one of his poems, part of one, was actually read at Princess Diana's funeral. So in a way, he spoke at Mark Twain's funeral and Princess Diana's. How many people can say that? And so we offer you his words now as part of our celebration of Christmas, as part of our celebration of the Prince of Peace. Glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth.
You, gentle listener, no doubt know the story of the 3 wise men of the East and how they traveled from far away to offer their gifts at the manger cradle in Bethlehem.
But have you ever heard the story of the other wise man, who also saw the star at its rising and set out to follow it, yet did not arrive with his brothers in the presence of the young child Jesus?
Have you heard of the great desire of this fourth pilgrim, and how it was denied, yet accomplished in the denial?
Have you heard of his many wanderings and the frustrations of his soul?
Have you heard of the long way of his seeking?
Have you perhaps heard of the strange way of finding the one whom he sought?
We will now tell you the tale, as we have heard the fragments of the story as it has resonated in the Hall of Dreams.
We will now tell you the tale, as we have heard the fragments of the story as it has resonated in the heart of all humanity.
In the days when Augustus Caesar was master of many kings and Herod reigned in Jerusalem, there lived in the city of Ecbatana, among the mountains of Persia, a certain man named Artaban.
His house stood close to the outermost of the 7 walls, which encircled the royal treasury.
From his roof, he could look over the rising battlements of black and white and crimson and blue and red and silver and gold to the hill where the summer palace of the Parthian emperors glittered like a jewel in a 7-fold crown.
Around the dwelling of Artaban spread a fair garden, a tangle of flowers and fruit trees, watered by streams descending from the slopes of Mount Orontes, and made musical by innumerable birds.
But all color was lost in the soft and odorous darkness of the late September night, and all sounds were hushed in the deep charm of its silence, save the splashing of water, like a voice half sobbing and half laughing under the shadows.
High above the trees, a dim glow of light shone through the curtained arches of the upper chamber, where the masters of the house were holding counsel with his friends.
He stood by the doorway to greet his guests. A tall, dark man of about 40 years, with brilliant eyes set near together under his broad brow, and firm lines graven around his fine, thin lips. The brow of a dreamer, and the mouth of a soldier.
a man of sensitive feeling, but inflexible will.
One of those men who, in whatever age they may live, are born for inward conflict and a life of quest.
His robe was of pure white wool, thrown over a tunic of silk, and his white pointed cap with long lapels at the side rested on the long flowing black hair.
It was the dress of the ancient priesthood of the Magi, called the fire worshippers.
Welcome, welcome, friends all. Welcome, Abdus, peace be with you, Rhodapses and Tigranes, and with you, my dear father, Abgarus. You are all welcome, and this house grows bright with the joy of your presence.
There were 9 of them, differing widely in age, but alike in the richness of their dress of many-colored silks, and in the massive golden collars around their necks, marking them as Parthian nobles, and in the winged circles of gold resting upon their chests, the sign of the followers of Zoroaster.
They took their places around a small black altar at the end of the room, where a tiny flame was burning. Artaban, standing beside it and waving a bundle of thin tamarisk branches above the fire, fed it with dry sticks of pine and fragrant oils.
Then he began the ancient chant of Asana, and the voices of his companions joined in the beautiful hymn to Ahura Mazda.
The fire rose with the chant, throbbing as if it were made of musical flame, until it cast a bright illumination through the whole apartment, revealing both its simplicity and its splendor.
The floor was laid with tiles of dark blue veined with white. Pilasters of twisted silver stood out against the blue walls. The clerestory of round, arched windows above them was hung with azure silk. The vaulted ceiling was a pavement of sapphires, like the body of heaven in its clearness, sewn with silver stars.
From the 4 corners of the roof hung 4 golden magic wheels, called the tongues of the gods. At the eastern end, behind the altar, there were 2 dark red pillars of porphyry, above the lintel of the same stone, on which was carved the figure of a winged archer with his arrow set to the string and his bow drawn.
The doorway between the pillars, which opened upon the terrace of the roof, was covered with a heavy curtain the color of a ripe pomegranate, embroidered with innumerable golden rays shooting upward from the floor.
In effect, the room was like a quiet, starry night, all azure and silver, flushed in the east with rosy promise of the dawn. It was, as the house of a man should be, an expression of the character and spirit of the master.
Artaban turned to his friends when the song was ended and invited them to be seated on the divan at the western end of the room.
You have come tonight at my call, as the faithful scholars of Zoroaster, to renew your worship and rekindle your faith in the God of purity. Even as this fire has been rekindled on this altar, we worship not the fire, but him of whom it is the chosen symbol, because it is the purest of all created things. It speaks to us of one who is light and truth. Is it not so, my father?
Oh, it is well said, my son. The enlightened are never idolaters. They lift the veil of the form and go to the shrine of reality, and new light and truth are coming to them continually through the old symbols.
Hear me then, my father and my friends, while I tell you of the new light and the truth that have come to me through the most ancient of all signs. We have searched the secrets of nature together and studied the healing virtues of water and fire and the plants. We have read also the books of prophecy in which the future is foretold in words that are hard to understand, but the highest of all learning.
The highest of learning is the knowledge of the stars.
Yes, Father, to trace their course is to untangle the mystery of life from the beginning to the end. If we could follow them perfectly, nothing would be hidden from us.
But is not our knowledge of them still incomplete? Are there not many stars beyond our horizon? Lights that are known only to the dwellers of the Southland, among the spice trees of Punt and the gold mines of Ophir?
The stars are the thoughts of the eternal. They are numberless. But the thoughts of a man can be counted like the years of his life. The wisdom of the Magi is the greatest of all wisdom on the earth, because it knows its own ignorance.
Ah, and that is the secret of power. We keep men always looking and waiting for a new sunrise, but we ourselves know that the darkness is equal to the light, and the conflict between them will never end.
That does not satisfy me, for if the waiting must be endless, if there could be no fulfillment in it, then it would not be wisdom to look and wait.
I do not understand, Artaban.
If we continue with that logic, we would become like the Greeks, who say that there is no truth, and that the only wise men are those who spend their lives in discovering and exposing the lies that have been believed in the world.
But the new sunrise will certainly dawn in the appointed time. Do not our own books tell us that this will come to pass, and that men will see the brightness of a great light?
That is true. Every faithful disciple of Zoroaster knows the prophecy of the Avesta and carries the word in his heart.
Yes, I know the prophecy. In that day, Sosiosh the victorious shall arise out of the number of prophets in the east country. Around him shall shine a mighty brightness, and he shall make life everlasting, incorruptible, and immortal, and the dead shall rise again.
That is a dark saying, and it may be that we shall never understand it. It is better to consider the things that are near at hand, and to increase the influence of the Magi in their own country, rather than to look for one who may be a stranger, and to whom we might resign our power.
My father, I have kept this prophecy in the secret place of my soul. Religion without a great hope would be an altar without a living fire. And now the flame has burned more brightly, and by the light of it I have read other words which also have come from the fountain of truth, and speak yet more clearly of the rising of the victorious one in his brightness. Behold, in the years that are lost in the past, long before our fathers came into the land of Babylon, there were wise men in Chaldea, from whom the Magi learned the secrets of the heavens. And of these, Balaam, the son of Beor, was one of the mightiest. Hear the words of his prophecy. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall arise out of Israel.
Judah was a captive by the waters of Babylon, and the sons of Jacob were in bondage to our kings. The tribes of Israel are scattered through the mountains like lost sheep, and the remnant that dwells in Judea under the yoke of Rome, neither star nor scepter shall arise.
And yet, it was the Hebrew Daniel, the mighty searcher of dreams, the counselor of kings, the wise Belshazzar, who was the most honored and beloved of our great King Cyrus. A prophet of sure things and a reader of the thoughts of God, Daniel proved himself to our people. And these are the words that he wrote. Know, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore Jerusalem unto the Anointed One, the Prince, the time shall be 67 weeks.
But my son, these are mystical numbers. Who can interpret them? Or who can find the key that will unlock their meaning?
It has been shown to me and to my 3 companions among the Magi, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. We have searched the ancient tablets of Chaldea and have computed the time. It falls in this year. We have studied the sky, and in the spring of the year, we saw 2 of the greatest stars draw near together in the sign of the fish, which is the house of the Hebrews. We also saw a new star there, which shone for 1 night, then vanished. Now again, the 2 great planets are meeting, this very night in their conjunction. My 3 brothers are watching at the ancient temple of the 7 spheres at Borsippa in Babylonia, and I am watching here. If the star shines again, they will wait 10 days for me at the temple, and then will set out together for Jerusalem to see and worship the promised one who shall be born the King of Israel. I believe the sign will come. I have made ready for the journey. I have sold my house and my possessions and bought these 3 jewels: a sapphire, a ruby, and a pearl, to carry them as a tribute to the King of Kings. And I ask you all to go with me on the pilgrimage, that we may have joy together in finding the Prince who is worthy to be served.
Artaban, this is a vain dream. It comes from too much looking upon the stars and the cherishing of lofty thoughts. It would be wiser to spend the time in gathering money for the new fire temple at Chala. No king will ever rise from the broken race of Israel, and no end will ever come to the eternal strife of light and darkness. He who looks for it is a chaser of shadows. Farewell, Artaban.
In my house there sleeps a new child, and I cannot leave her nor take her on this strange journey. This quest is not for me, but may thy steps be prospered wherever you go. So farewell, Artaban. Blessing on you and your quest.
I am ill and unfit for hardship. But there is a man among my servants whom I will send with you when you leave, to bring me word on how your journey is progressing.
My son, it may be that the light of truth is in the sign that has appeared in the skies, and that it will surely lead to the prince and his mighty brightness. Or it may be that it is only a shadow of the light, as Tigranes has said, and then he who follows it will have only a long pilgrimage and an empty search. But it is better to follow even the shadow of the best than to remain content with the worst. And those who would see wonderful things must often be ready to travel alone.
Will you not go with me on my quest, my father?
Oh, Artaban, I am far too old for this journey, but my heart shall be a companion of the pilgrimage day and night, and I shall know the end of your quest. Go in peace, my son. Go in peace.
So, one by one, they went out of the azure chamber with its silver stars, and Artaban was left in solitude.
Artaban gathered up his jewels and replaced them in his belt. For a long time he stood and watched the flame that flickered and sank upon the altar. Then he crossed the hall, lifted the heavy curtain, and passed out between the dull red pillars of porphyry to the terrace on the roof.
The shiver that thrills through the earth as she rouses from her night's sleep, had already begun, and the cool wind that heralds the daybreak was drawing downward from the lofty, snow-traced ravines of Mount Orontes. Birds, half wakened, crept and chirped among the rustling leaves, and the smell of ripened grapes came in brief wafts from the arbors.
Far over the eastern plain, a white mist stretched like a lake, but where the distant peak of Mount Zagros serrated the western horizon, the sky was clear. Jupiter and Saturn rolled together like drops of lambent flame about to blend in one.
As Artaban watched them, behold, an azure spark was born out of the darkness beneath, rounding itself with purple splendors to a crimson sphere, and springing upward through rays of saffron and orange into a point of white radiance. Tiny and infinitely remote, yet perfect in every part, it pulsated in the enormous vault as if the 3 jewels in Artaban's belt had mingled and been transformed into a living heart of light.
Artaban bowed his head and covered his brow with his hands.
It is the sign. The king is coming, and I will go to meet him.
All night long, Vasta, the swiftest of Artaban's horses, had been waiting, saddled and bridled, in her stall, pawing the ground impatiently, and shaking her bit as if she shared her master's purpose, though she knew not its meaning.
Before the birds had fully roused to their strong, high, joyful chant of morning song, before the white mist had begun to lift lazily from the plain, the other wise man, Artaban, was in the saddle, riding swiftly along the high road which skirted the base of Mount Orontes westward.
Then, through the keen morning air, the swift hoofs beat their spirited music along the road, keeping time to the pulsing of 2 hearts with the same eager desire to conquer space, to devour the distance, to attain the goal of the journey.
Artaban must indeed ride wisely and well if he would keep the appointment meeting with the other magi. For the route was 150 miles, and 15 was the utmost he could travel in a day. But he knew Vasta's strength and pushed forward without anxiety, making the fixed distance every day, though he must travel late into the night and in the morning begin long before sunrise.
He passed along the brown slopes of Mount Orontes, furrowed by the rocky courses of its 100 torrents.
He crossed the level plains of the Niceans, where the famous herds of horses, feeding in their wild pastures, tossed their heads at Vasta's approach, and galloped away with a thunder of many hoofs. And flocks of wild birds rose suddenly from the swampy meadows, wheeling in great circles with a shining flutter of innumerable wings and shrill cries of surprise.
He traversed the fertile fields of Coincabar, where the dust from the threshing floors filled the air with a golden mist, half hiding the huge temple of Astarte with its 400 pillars.
At Bagistan, among the gardens watered by fountains from the rock, he looked up at the mountain thrusting its immense rugged brow over the road, and saw the figure of King Darius trampling upon his fallen foes, and the proud list of his word and conquest graven high upon the face of the eternal cliff.
Over many a cold and desolate pass, crawling painfully across the windswept shoulders of the hills.
Down many a black mountain gorge,
where the river roared and raced before him like a savage guide.
Across many a smiling vale and terraces of yellow limestone, full with vines and fruit trees.
Through the dark oak groves of Karin and the darker gates of Zagros.
into the ancient city of Chala, where the people of Samaria had been kept in captivity long ago.
And out again by the mighty portal, riven through the encircling hills, where he saw the image of the high priest of the Magi sculptured on the wall of rock, with hands uplifted as if to bless the pilgrims.
Past the entrance of the narrow defile, filled from end to end with orchards and peaches and figs, through which the river of Glindes foamed down to meet him.
Across the swirling floods of the Tigris and the many channels of the Euphrates, flowing yellow through the cornlands.
Artaban pressed onward until he arrived at nightfall of the 10th day, beneath the shattered walls of populous Babylon.
Vazda was almost spent, and Artaban would have gladly turned into the city to find rest and refreshment for himself and for his beloved horse. But he knew that it was 3 hours' journey yet to the Temple of the Seven Spheres, and he must reach the place by midnight if he would join his waiting comrades. So he did not halt, but rode steadily across the stubble fields.
A grove of golden date palms made an island of gloom in the pale yellow sea of the fields. As he passed into the shadow, Vazda slackened her pace and began to pick her way more carefully.
Near the farther end of the darkness, an excess of caution seemed to fall on the noble horse. She scented some danger or difficulty. It was not in her heart to fly from it, only to be prepared for it, and to meet it wisely, as a good horse should do. The grove was close and silent as the tomb. Not a leaf rustled, not a bird sang.
Vazda felt her steps before her delicately, carrying her head low and sighing now and then with apprehension. At last, she gave a quick breath of anxiety and dismay and stood stock still, quivering in every muscle before a dark object in the shadow of a palm tree.
Artaban dismounted. The dim starlight revealed the form of a woman lying across the road. Her humble dress and the outline of her haggard face showed that she was probably one of the poor Hebrew exiles who still dwelt in great numbers in the vicinity. her pallid skin, dry and yellow as parchment, bore the mark of the deadly fever which ravaged the marshlands in autumn. The chill of death was in her hand, and as Artaban released it, the arm fell back inertly upon the woman's motionless breast.
Artaban turned away with a thought of pity, consigning the body to that of strange burial which the Magi deemed most fitting, the funeral of the desert, which the kikes and vultures rise on dark wings, and the beasts of prey slink furtively away, leaving only a heap of white bones in the sand.
But as Artaban turned, a long, faint, ghostly sigh came from the woman's lips. The brown, bony fingers closed convulsively on the hem of Artaban's robe and held him fast.
Artaban's heart leaped to his throat, not with fear, but with a silent resentment at the importunity of this blind delay.
How could he stay here in the darkness to minister to a dying stranger?
What claim has this unknown fragment of human life upon his compassion or his service?
If he lingered here but for an hour, he could hardly reach Borsippa at the appointed time. His companions would think he had given up the journey. They would go without him. He would lose his quest.
But if he went on now, the woman would surely die. If he stayed, he might save her life. Artaban's spirit throbbed and fluttered with the urgency of the crisis. Should he risk the great reward of his divine faith for the single deed of human love? Should he turn aside, if only for a moment, from following the star to give a cup of cold water to a poor, perishing Hebrew?
God of truth and purity, direct me in the holy path, the only way of wisdom which only thou knowest.
Artaban turned back to the sick woman. Loosening the grasp of her hand, he carried her to a little mound at the foot of a palm tree.
Artaban unbound the thick folds of the turban and opened the garments above the woman's sunken breast.
Artaban brought water from one of the small canals nearby and moistened the poor Hebrew's brow and mouth.
Artaban mingled a draught of one of those simple but potent remedies which he always carried with him. For the Magi were physicians as well as astrologers, and poured it slowly between the colorless lips.
Hour after hour, Artaban labored as only a skillful healer can do, and at last, the Hebrew's strength returned. She sat up and looked about her.
Who are you? And why have you sought me here? Why have you bothered to restore me to health and bring life back into my dying frame?
I am Artaban, the Magi, from the city of Ecbatana, and I am traveling to Jerusalem in search of the one who is to be born King of the Jews, a great prince and deliverer of all mankind. I dare not delay any longer on my journey, for the caravan that has waited for me may depart without me. But see, here is all I have left of bread and wine, and here is a portion of healing herbs. When your strength is restored, you can find the dwellings of the Hebrews among the houses of Babylon.
May the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob bless you and prosper the journey of the merciful and bring you in peace to your desired haven. But stay, I have nothing to give you in return, only this. I can tell you where the Messiah must be sought, for our prophets have said that he should be born not in Jerusalem, but in Bethlehem of Judah. May the Lord bring you in safety to that place, because you have pity on the sick and dying.
It was now long past midnight. Artaban rode in haste, and Vazda, restored by the brief rest, ran eagerly through the silent plain and swam the channel of the river. She put forth the remnants of her strength and fled over the ground like a gazelle.
But the first beam of the sun sent her shadow before her as she entered upon the final mile of the journey. And the eyes of Artaban, scanning the great mound of Nimrod and the temple of the seven spheres, could discern no trace of his friends.
Artaban rode swiftly around the hill. He dismounted and climbed to the highest terrace, looking out towards the west.
The vast desolation of the marshes stretched away to the horizon and the border of the desert. Bitterns stood by the stagnant pools, and the jackals skulked through the low brushes. But there was no sign of the caravan of wise men, near or far.
At the edge of the terrace, Artaban saw a little cairn of broken bricks, and under them a piece of parchment. He picked it up and read.
We have waited past midnight. We can delay no longer. We go to find the king. Follow us across the desert.
How can I cross the desert with no food and a spent horse? I must return to Babylon, sell my sapphire, and buy a train of camels, as well as food and provisions for the journey. I may never catch up with my friends. Only God the Merciful knows whether I shall not lose the sight of the king because I delayed to show mercy to the Hebrew.
So Artaban mounted the exhausted Vasta, and, tired and saddened, hastened toward Babylon.
Artaban continued on his dreary and lonely journey, passing over the dreary undulations of the desert, high upon the back of his camel, rocking steadily onward like a ship over the waves.
The land of death spread its cruel net around him. The stony wastes bore no fruit but briars and thorns. The dark ledges of rock thrust themselves above the surface here and there like the bones of perished monsters. Arid and inhospitable mountain ranges rose before him, furrowed with dry channels of ancient torrents, white and ghastly as scars on the face of nature. Shifting hills of treacherous sand were heaped like tombs along the horizon.
By day, the fierce heat pressed its intolerable burden on the quivering air, and no living creature moved over the silent, swooning earth, except for tiny jerboas scuttling through the bushes and lizards vanishing into the cliffs of the rock.
By night, the jackals prowled and barked in the distance, and the lion made a black ravine echo with his hollow roaring, while a bitter, blighting chill followed the fever of the day. Through the heat and the cold, Artaban pressed steadily onward.
But all was not death and decay. Artaban looked about him and saw the gardens and orchards of Damascus, watered by the streams of Abana and Pharpar, with their sloping swards inlaid with fantastic blooms and their thickets filled with myrrh and roses.
Artaban also saw the long, snowy ridge of Hermon and the dark groves of cedars,
and the valley of the Jordan,
and the blue waters of the Lake of Galilee,
and the fertile plains of Esdraelon,
and the hills of Ephraim,
and the highlands of Judah.
Artaban moved steadily onward until he arrived in the town of Bethlehem. And it happened to be the third day after his 3 brother wise men had come to the stable and found Mary and Joseph with their young child, and had laid their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh at his feet.
Then Artaban, the other wise man, drew near, weary but full of hope, bearing his ruby and his pearl to offer to the infant king.
For now, at last, I shall surely find him, though it may be alone, and later than my brother Magi. This is the place of which the Hebrew exile I helped told me that the prophets had spoken. and here I shall behold the rising of the great light. But I must inquire about the visit of my brother Magi, and to what house the star directed them, and to whom they presented their tribute and gifts.
The streets of the village seemed to be deserted, and Artaban had wondered whether the men had all gone up to the hill pastures to bring down their sheep. From the open door of a lone stone cottage, he heard the sound of a woman's voice singing softly.
Artaban entered the cottage and found a young mother hushing her baby to sleep.
Who are you, and what do you want with me or my child?
Peace be with you, my lady. I bring no violence or harm to your home. I am looking for my 3 brothers, wise men, magi, astrologers from the east, who have surely been here in this city just a few days ago. Have you seen them? What news have you to give me?
I have seen marvelous strangers here from the far east, who appeared in the village not 3 days ago, and how they said that a star had guided them to a place where Joseph of Nazareth was lodging with his wife and her newborn child.
That's exactly what I'm after, and who I am following. Please, tell me more.
Well, all I can tell you is that they paid reverence to the child and gave him many rich gifts.
Is that all the news of this that you have for me?
Let me think. I seem to remember that the travelers disappeared again as suddenly as they had come. Frankly, we were afraid of their visit. We did not understand it. Joseph of Nazareth took the babe and his mother and fled away that night secretly, and it was whispered they were going far away to Egypt.
To Egypt?
Yes, to Egypt. And ever since, there has been a spell on this village. Something evil hangs over it. They say that Roman soldiers are coming from Jerusalem to force a new tax from us, and the men of the village have driven the flocks and herds back among the hills and hidden themselves to escape it.
Artaban listened to her gentle, timid speech, and the child in her arms looked upon his face and smiled, stretching out his rosy hands to grasp the winged circle of gold on Artaban's chest. His heart warmed to the touch. It seemed like a greeting of love to one who had journeyed long in loneliness and perplexity, fighting with his own doubts and fears, and following a light that was veiled in clouds.
Might not this child have been the promised prince?
Artaban stooped and lovingly touched the babe's soft cheek.
Kings have been born in lowlier houses than this, and the favorite of the stars may rise even from a lowly cottage. But it not seem good to the God of wisdom to reward my search so soon and so easily. The one whom I seek has gone before me, and now I must follow the king to Egypt.
The young mother laid the babe in its cradle and rose to minister to the wants of the strange guest.
My friend, here is food for you. Plain food, yes. It is the food of the poor, but willingly offered, and therefore full of refreshment for your soul as well as your body. Please take and eat, and do so with my gratitude.
I accept your offering with deep gratitude, madam. Thank you from the depths of my heart for your hospitality.
Artaban, the mother and the young child, sat in comfort and contentment, enjoying each other's gentle company and basking in the pleasant silence of the lowly cottage.
Suddenly, there came the noise of a wild confusion and the uproar in the streets of the village, a shrieking and wailing of women's voices.
A clangor of brazen trumpets and a clashing of swords and a desperate cry.
The soldiers! They're killing our children! They're killing our children!
The young mother's face grew white with terror. She clasped her child to her bosom and crouched motionless in the darkest corner of the room, covering her baby with the folds of her robe, lest he should wake and cry out.
But Artaban went quickly and stood in the doorway of the house. His broad shoulders filled the portal from side to side, and the peak of his cap all but touched the lintel.
The soldiers came hurrying down the street with bloody hands and dripping swords. At the sight of the stranger in his imposing dress, they hesitated with surprise. The captain of the soldiers approached Artaban.
Move aside, I say.
I move for no man. Do you hear me? No man.
Artaban's face was as calm as though he were watching the stars, and in his eyes burned that steady radiance before even the half-tamed hunting leopard shrinks, and the fierce bloodhound pauses in his leap. In a word, Artaban's power and majesty stunned the captain.
I am alone in this place, and I am waiting to give this precious jewel to the prudent captain who will leave me in peace.
Artaban showed the captain the ruby, glistening in the hollow of his hand like a great drop of blood.
The captain was amazed at the splendor of the gem. The pupils of his eyes expanded with desire, and the lines of greed wrinkled around his lips. He stretched out his hand and took the ruby.
March on. There's no child here in this house. This house is still.
The clamor and the clang of arms passed down the street as the headlong fury of the chase sweeps by the secret covert where the trembling deer is hidden.
Artaban re-entered the cottage. He turned his face to the east and he prayed.
God of truth, forgive my sin. I have said the thing that is not, to save a little child, have lied to the soldiers, and 2 of my gifts for the child king are gone. I have spent for man that which was meant for God. Shall I ever be worthy to see the face of the king?
My dear and blessed friend, because you have saved the life of my little one, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Artaban left the tiny cottage, bewildered and confused, but somehow knowing that he had done the right thing after all. His search was not at an end, and he directed himself to continue to search for the Christ child.
The years of Artaban were flowing very swiftly now, and he continued to search for the infant king.
Artaban moved among the throngs of men in populous Egypt, seeking everywhere for traces of the household that had come down from Bethlehem, and finding them under the spreading sycamore trees of Heliopolis, and beneath the walls of the Roman fortress of New Babylon beside the Nile.
Artaban paused at the foot of the pyramids, which lifted their sharp points into the intense saffron glow of the sunset sky. Changeless monuments of the imperishable glory and the imperishable hope of humanity.
He looked up into the vast countenance of the Sphinx and vainly tried to read the meaning of its calm eyes and smiling mouth. Was it indeed the mockery of all effort and aspiration, the cruel jest of a riddle that had no answer, a search that can never succeed?
Or was there a touch of pity and encouragement in that inscrutable smile, a promise that even the defeated should obtain a victory, and the disappointed should discover a prize? The ignorant should be made wise. The blind should see, and the wandering should come into the haven at last.
Artaban visited an obscure house in the city of Alexandria and took counsel with an aged Hebrew rabbi. The venerable man, bending over the rolls of parchment on which the prophecies of Israel were written, read aloud the pathetic words which foretold the sufferings of the promised Messiah. the most despised and rejected of men, the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief.
And remember, my son, the king whom you are seeking is not to be found in a palace, nor among the rich and powerful. If the light of the world and the glory of Israel had been appointed to come with the greatness of earthly splendor, it must have appeared long ago. For no son of Abraham will ever again rival the power which Joseph had in the palace of Egypt, or the magnificence of Solomon, thrown between the lions in Jerusalem.
Rabbi, I don't quite understand. Tell me more.
The light for which the world is waiting is a new light, the glory that shall rise out of the patient and triumphant suffering. And the kingdom to be established is a new kingdom, the royalty of perfect and incomparable love.
How will this happen, O wise teacher?
I do not know how this shall come to pass, nor how the turbulent kings of the peoples of the earth shall be brought to acknowledge the Messiah and pay homage to him. But this I do know. Those who seek him will do well to look among the poor and the lowly, the sorrowful and the oppressed.
Thank you, Rabbi, thank you. That is where I also shall seek him.
So Artaban traveled from place to place, searching among the peoples of the dispersion, with whom the little family from Bethlehem might, perhaps, have found a refuge.
He passed through countries where famine lay heavy on the land, and the poor were crying for bread.
He made his dwellings with the plague-stricken cities, where the sick were languishing in the bitter companionship of helpless misery.
He visited the oppressed and the afflicted in the gloom of subterranean prisons and the crowded wretchedness of slave markets and the weary toil of galley ships.
He fed the hungry, clothed the naked, healed the sick, and comforted the captive. And his years went by more swiftly than the weaver's shuttle that flashed forth through the loom while the web grows, and the invisible pattern is completed and revealed.
At times, it seemed that he had almost forgotten his quest.
But once, at sunrise, Artaban was waiting at the gates of a Roman prison. He had taken from its secret resting place the pearl, the very last of his jewels.
As Artaban looked at the beautiful pearl, a mellower luster, a soft and iridescent light full of shifting gleams of azure and rose trembled upon its surface.
The pearl seemed to have absorbed some of the colors of the lost sapphire and ruby.
So the profound, secret purpose of a noble life draws into itself the memories of past joy and past sorrow.
All that helped it, all that hindered it, is transfused by a subtle magic into its very essence.
It becomes more luminous and precious the longer it is carried close to the warmth of a beating heart.
This pearl was to be the ultimate pearl of great price for Artaban.
"33 years of the life of Artaban had passed away, and he was still a pilgrim and a seeker after the king. His hair, once darker than the cliffs of Zagros, was now white as the wintry snow that covered them. And his eyes that had once flashed like flame were dull as embers smoldering among the ashes.
Still looking for the king, but also worn out, weary, and ready to die, Artaban at last came to the city of Jerusalem. He had often visited the city before and had searched through all of its lanes and crowded hovels and dark prisons without finding any trace of the family of Nazarenes who had fled from Bethlehem long ago.
But now it seemed that he must make one more effort, and something whispered in his heart that at last he might just succeed.
It was the season of Passover. The city was thronged with strangers. The children of Israel, scattered in far lands all over the world, had returned to the temple for the great feast, and there had been a confusion of tongues in the narrow streets for many days.
But on this particular day, there was a singular agitation in the multitude. The sky itself was veiled with a portentous gloom, and currents of excitement seemed to flash through the crowd like the thrill which shakes the forest on the eve of a great storm.
A secret tide was sweeping them all one way, the clatter of sandals and the soft, thick sounds of thousands of bare feet shuffling over the stones, flowing unceasingly along the streets that led to the Damascus Gate.
Artaban joined company with a group of people from his own country, Parthian Jews who had come up to keep the Passover, and inquired of them the cause of the tumult and where they were going.
We are going to the place called Golgotha, outside the city walls.
Yes, there is to be an execution. A real live execution.
Have you not heard about what happened?
No, I have not. I have been traveling, you see.
Well, 2 famous robbers are to be crucified, and with them another called Jesus of Nazareth.
Jesus of Nazareth?
Yes, Jesus of Nazareth.
Who is this man?
He is a man who has done many wonderful works among the people, so that they love him greatly.
But the priests and the elders have said that he must die, because he has claimed to be the Son of God.
Yes, and Pontius Pilate has sent him to the cross, because he said that he was king of the Jews.
How strangely these familiar words fell upon the tired heart of Artaban.
They had led him for a lifetime over land and sea, and now they came to him darkly and mysteriously like a message of despair. The king had arisen, but he had been denied and cast out.
The king was about to perish. Perhaps he was already dying. Could it be the same one who had been born in Bethlehem 33 years ago, at whose birth the star had appeared in the heavens, and of whose coming the prophets had spoken?
The ways of God are stranger than the thoughts of humans, and it may be that I shall find the king at last in the hands of his enemies, and shall come in time to offer my pearl for his ransom before he dies.
So Artaban, aged and bent with time and grief, followed the multitude with slow and painful steps toward the Damascus gate of the city.
Just beyond the entrance to the guardhouse, a troop of Macedonian soldiers came down the street, dragging a young girl with a torn dress and disheveled hair.
Hey, let me go!
Get her!
Let go of me!
Grab her, quick!
As Artaban paused to look at her with compassion, she broke suddenly from the hands of her tormentors and threw herself at his feet, clasping him around the knees. She had seen his white cap and the winged circle of the Magi on his chest.
Have pity on me! Have pity on me! Save me, oh save me for the sake of God of purity. I am also a daughter of the true religion which is taught by the Magi. My father was a merchant of Parthia, but he is dead. And I am seized for his debts to be sold as a slave. Save me from this fate worse than death, I beg of you, my countrymen. Save me.
Artaban trembled.
It was the old conflict of his soul, which had come to him in the palm grove of Babylon and in the cottage at Bethlehem. The conflict between the expectation of faith and the impulse of love.
Twice the gift which he had consecrated to the worship of religion had been drawn from his hand to the service of humanity. This was the third trial. The final and irrevocable choice.
Was it his great opportunity or his last temptation? He could not tell. Only one thing was clear in the darkness of his mind. It was inevitable. And does not the inevitable come from God?
He took the pearl from under his cloak. Never had it seemed so luminous, so radiant, so full of tender, living luster. He laid it in the hands of the girl.
This is your ransom, daughter of Parthia. It is the last of my treasures, which I kept for the king.
God bless you, sir. God bless you.
Suddenly, the darkness of the sky thickened, and the shuddering tremors ran through the earth, heaving convulsively like the breast of one who struggles with a mighty grief.
The walls of the houses rocked to and fro. Stones were loosened and crashed into the street. Dust clouds filled the air.
The soldiers fled in terror, reeling like drunken men. But Artaban and the slave girl he had ransomed crouched helpless beneath the wall of the praetorium.
I'm so afraid. Aren't you afraid?
What have I to fear? What have I to live for?
I don't understand you. What do you mean?
I have given away the last remnant of my tribute for the king. I have parted with the last hope of finding him. My quest is over, and it has failed.
Failed?
Yes, failed. Yet even in that thought, accepted and embraced, I can find some sense of peace.
You mean resignation?
No, not resignation, not submission. It's something more profound and searching. I know that all is well because I have done the best I could from day to day.
What do you mean?
I have been true to the light that was given to me. And if I have not found the king, if failure is all that comes out of my life, doubtless this was the best that was possible. I have not seen the revelation of life everlasting, incorruptible, and immortal. But I also know that if I had to do it all over again, I would do the same things with the gifts for the king.
One more lingering pulsation of the earthquake quivered through the ground. A heavy tile, shaken from the roof, fell and struck Artaban on the temple.
Artaban lay breathless and pale, with his gray head resting on the young girl's shoulder and the blood trickling from the wound.
As she bent over him, fearing he was dead, there came a voice through the twilight, very small and still, like music sounding from a distance in which the notes are clear, but the words are lost.
The girl turned to see if someone had spoken from the window above them, but she saw no one there.
Artaban's lips began to move, as if in answer to the voice, and she heard him say in their native Parthian language,
"Not so, my lord. For when did I see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? When did I see you as a stranger and took you in, or naked and gave you some clothes? When did I see you sick or in prison and came and ministered to you? For 33 years I looked for you, but I have never seen your face, nor ministered to you, my king."
Artaban ceased talking, and the sweet musical voice came again. And again, the wind heard it faintly and very far away. But now, it seemed as though the young girl actually understood what the voice was saying.
"Truly, I say to you, inasmuch as you have done these things for the least of my brothers and sisters, you have done them to me."
A calm radiance of wonder and joy lighted the pale face of Artaban, like the first ray of dawn on a snowy mountain peak.
One long, last breath gently exhaled from his lips, and Artaban was still.
His journey was ended. His treasures were accepted.
Artaban, the other wise man, had finally found the king.
The Story of the Other Wise Man by Henry Van Dyck was adapted for radio by David Bryant and featured the voice talents of
David Shaw
as Narrator 1,
Cindy Smith
as Narrator 2,
Mark Young
as Narrator 3,
Kathy Shaw
as Narrator 4,
John Zadraco
as Artaban, David Bryant as Abgarus,
Nancy Lineberger
as Tigranes,
Kathy Yeagle
as Friend 1,
Annette Harrison
as Friend 2,
Penny Fennig
as the Hebrew,
Bob Lineberger
as Magi 1,
Maggie Montgomery
as Mother,
Kathy Yeagle
as Woman,
Stephen Newshome
as Captain,
Charles Fulton
as Rabbi,
Mary Fulton,
as Parthian 1,
Dawn Michael,
as Parthian 2,
Jane Murray,
as Parthian 3,
Mark Young
as Parthian 4,
Olivia Zavarik,
as Girl,
Gabe Zavarik,
as the Roman soldier,
Bill Michael,
as the voice of Jesus. Music for The Other Wise Man was composed by David Bryant and featured the hymn tune Cheney, words by Mark Young, written in memory of Blake Cheney. Merry Christmas and blessings of peace and hope from First United Methodist Church of Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, December 2020.